evening, everyone. This is Ai of Online Healing Community, and welcome to Creating Space. I'll be your host once a month on topics related to arts, culture, and community. So tonight we're going to talk about how creativity is very essential in transforming our lives as we journey on a wayfinding process of navigating from illusion, intuition, and imagination to shape a new story for ourselves, our communities, and ecosystems in this age of disruption. The journey from surviving to thriving through creativity. So stay tuned. So tonight's guest weaves deep ecology, creative arts, and change making as a regenerative design strategist using and awareness-based systems change. She also holds almost 15 years of development work experience working in environmental education, peace building, cultural heritage, conservation, and humanitarian recovery. She trained in transformative and expressive arts practices with Bilderbridge Institute and the European Graduate School. She holds a certificate in eco-psychology from the Pacifica Graduate Institute and is completing her training as facilitator for the world that reconnects. She also serves as resource person and as an exhibiting artist with the Carl Jung Circle Philippines and as a member of the Expressive Arts Philippines Network. So friends, help me welcome Miss Sarah Queblatin. Hello, Sarah.
Hi,
Welcome to Creating
Ivy.
Space.
Salamat. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm really inspired to be here, and it's super refreshing to think of this topic tonight in the middle of what is happening in the world, in our lives, and I'm really really grateful.
And we're also so happy, honored, and grateful to have you tonight. And we're excited to journey with you. And I'm sure the audience are also excited to learn more and for us to learn from each other. No? So for those who are watching, please put in the comments section where you're joining us from, and if you have any insights or questions, please feel free to share them in the comment section. So yeah, so let's dive into it. Um, so Sarah, you carry several hats while doing your part in helping with societal transformation through the various initiatives that you hold space for or you co-create with other people. Tonight, however, we are highlighting your role as a cultural creative. So for those who are not familiar with this term or who are encountering this concept for the first time, could you briefly paint us a picture of who cultural creatives are and what they do?
Yeah, so it's a term actually. I think it's a term that was used by sociologists. I think back in the 80s to refer to people who are like kind of changing paradigms and radicalizing the systems, trying to change the way we see the world and solutions happening. It's also those who are wanting to because the word culture is there. It's really culture is how our belief systems shape the way our systems are formed, our policies, the way our way of life, our standards of thinking and belonging. So and then the creative part is like those who are really kind of disrupting or transforming, creating new spaces or creating new ways of thinking. So those are the two words that make up, and these are mostly the generation that's trying to transform our culture, to transform our mental models. The mental models are more of like what do we really believe that actually are the core of why challenges are. So when we in systems thinking, we're thinking about deeper story why issues are there, why the physical, the tangible problems are there that are not really just physical. They're actually rooted in belief systems, in historical trauma, in ways of thinking and perception about a problem in a community or a place. So cultural creatives are people who try to change the culture, and so whether they are against their counterculture, they're trying to against going the grain. These are trying to, well, the extreme end could be the anarchists, but there are people who are like the vegans or the environmentalists. Back then, maybe in the 70s, 80s, environmentalists were kind of new people. They're not so mainstream now. They're like everywhere. We're all environmentalists or advocates of caring for the earth, but these are the people who are also kind of having led the steps ahead. They're well, I guess I'm also one of them, trying to be one of them. These are also people who are trying to change the way we view change, because change is often people resist change, and so people who have that courage to you know look ahead beyond what is not yet there, and innovating the system and hospicing or midwifing a new way of thinking, a new story for the community. So I guess that's cultural creative. I don't know if that's a little overview, perhaps.
Wow, thank you. I also remember that I think there was a study done on the work of cultural creatives. Like, was it a million? So yeah, I remember a book on that by a sociologist and a psychologist, and it's really impressive how the cultural creatives, this movement, and from what I understand, there's also several waves, right? Like three waves in that movement. So how the cultural creatives really paved the way for a lot of transformation in various aspects of society. So that's really crucial work, and thank you for all you do, and for all our fellow cultural creatives. We really admire and we honor you for your work. So, another thing, whenever you share about your personal journey, so these are usually intricately intertwined with collective journeys and your initiatives, right? You also frequently mention the importance of restoring or transforming the narrative from the personal to creative, collective levels. So, how important is this aspect, and how does creativity support and nurture this process of restoring?
Yeah, so yeah, a lot of my, I guess, life journey stems from the experience of chaos, and I don't think I'm alone in this. A lot of us have had grown up with challenging childhoods, or with our a lot of the environment that whether it's at home or the community. And then also in my work, also we're working with communities affected by disasters and displacement. It's the idea that the antidote to chaos is creativity. Chaos and creativity, they work hand in hand. Chaos can be a disruptor, but it can also be a very powerful um, healing kind of trigger. Helps us kind of look deeper into why was there chaos in the first place, and what are ways to kind of use this as an opportunity to create a new story. So one way to kind of look at it is that when a typhoon hits a whole house, kunyari the house is broken and all the parts are out there, and you don't actually build the same house, right? Because that house was destroyed already, and obviously there's a reason why it got destroyed. Probably where you placed the house, where you positioned the materials you did. When you rebuild your house, you're not going to rebuild it the same way. You're not going to be using all the parts that were damaging and have been factors to that destruction. You only choose the parts, perhaps, that were like, this is still useful, this is strong enough, but I'm gonna build a new house and build it somewhere else, or the way you build it again. It's like a metaphor of how do you create a new story for yourself. And story is powerful because it's really uh, it's the core of human meaning and experience. It's really uh, we think of the way we process our experience is from the stories, right? From history books, or even data that we gather every day is story. The way we make meaning out of information is really based on story. And so the way we live our lives is like that storytelling process. And so creativity as an antidote to chaos, it reminds us that we could reclaim that. It's something that is not new to us. It's actually innate, because I like the idea to remember that in a divinity, parang the way different traditions teach us that, there's a creation story for why we all exist. They may vary across different religions or spiritual practices or belief, but all of them have an origin story where humans began or the earth began. And so the same with, how you, where you came from that process of being created and being born. So that actually is like innate in us, that we are, literally we're capable of having children, or and the same way as we have created civilizations that, really good civilizations, but at the same time we also have the capacity to create destructive systems, destructive thoughts, and destructive practices. So that is such a powerful thing to remember. But of course, it's not always something you can reclaim right away, because it's our conditioning. From childhood, we were like taught not to think for ourselves, by ourselves. We were taught to like think how the school should say, and how to draw, how to write, even pag drawing, di ba? Like to draw the same way you have to draw and follow, or not go beyond the lines. I mean, it's basic as that. But it's also the same, like we have forgotten to think freely about, you know, what what is deeper and inner truths that we probably should be thinking about. But because our society is built to kind of think, to help shape us in a good, there is a purpose to it, of course, to mold us. And because it comes from historical, truth and evidence of good, I'm sure, I trust that it's also coming from that purpose of for everyone's well-being, hopefully. But is it relevant, of course, during the time? That's a question of whether, this way of thinking is should be disrupted or transformed. But going back to creativity, working in chaos, in disasters, in working with people, we've also worked with people who had cancer and depression, is really working to reclaim that we can create something, even if it's not a manifested, tangible thing. It's also with our thoughts, and then with the way we think. And so we create as early as that. The way we think manifests with what we do, and what we, it, our behavior reflects on that. And then the kind of experience we create out of that is also a creation process. So in many levels, that's part of it. In my work, of course, working as a regenerative design strategist, I work with permaculture and eco-village design. It's the idea that we can design the kind of ecosystem or way of life we want by knowing how to work with nature, working with each other, the resources we already have, the inner and outer resources that we have. How do we design a system that we really want for ourselves? So it's really when you think about the systems that are changing now, the collapse of the old way of living. The pandemic also just showed us, that this system is no longer working. It's a matter of you are trying to rescue an old system to, like, resuscitate, or but there are
Yeah.
people like digital creatives, movers already sharing, like, hey, like for example, I've come from, I've worked with the eco village movement for a long time, and we've also brought it to the UN and all these things, and the proof that communities can self survive on renewable energy, on growing their own food, and creating an economy based on compassion. And it shows us that you don't need to really be dependent on a system that keeps you stuck to becoming dependent. It's really being able to design something. That kind of, the power to design is actually a creative skill, because you're now reclaiming, okay, I will not be dependent on this very carbon consuming energy grid. I can source it from the sun, or I can grow my own food, and that's actually the most powerful creative force there, because the creation word itself, in Tagalog is likha, diba? And then I like the word that kalikasan is like also likha is part of that, kalikasan. And of course, the beautiful ka in prefix in all of the words is about sharing the self. So the shared creation or the co-creation is how I define nature. And so for me, that's, nature and our capacity to create with nature. And because we are nature, there's that relationship with creation as well. Yeah, so that's the practice that I'm also cultivating on my own, and hopefully it continues to translate in what I do with others.
And I remember when we talk about creativity, it's not just creativity in the sense of like art making, like tangible um uh creative stuff, right? Like from what I remember with sessions also with other mentors who are in the same movements, creativity is closely linked with our ability for imagination, and when we tap into both of these that are inherent in us, that's when we are able to come up with solutions that we would not have um, ever thought about if we're basing our perspective on old paradigms, right, or the past. So can you um, ha- have you have you encountered some examples of how important nurturing this ability for imagination and creative thinking, creativity, um, on that level where you can tap into something greater than than what you already know, or what you would just know from things you studied in school, and the old paradigms. Hello, Sarah.
Sorry,
You
I
can.
muted
Yeah.
myself. I'm sorry about
No,
that.
you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd like to share first some creative archetypes that I've kind of observed over the years. So in my work, we work with permaculture and disasters and displacement. But because it's such a different concept, although to be honest, it's the original ways how our indigenous peoples think and design and work with nature. But because we've been so mainstream with the agro-industrial way of growing food and all these things, it's so hard to engage right away. So we work with early adapters, those who are ready and willing and capable to lead. So we only work with a few of them so that they could influence others later on. And when people see is to believe they're already doing it. In the field, we've been observing the three archetypes of early adapters. The first one is the visionary, and this is also applicable to the different kinds of people we see who are innovators, and not just in the disaster area, but the visionary is someone that who can see the future even if it's not yet there, and then he or she engages others to the idea that even it's not yet real, like you really capture everyone to do it. We when we did a visioning with women after Typhoon Haiyan, it's not everyone wanted. Almost everyone wanted to just build their own homes, rebuild, take care of their family. which was great to see a future like that. But there were like three or four women who was like, I want a market in my community. I want a forest. I want our coffee back. I want all these things. And so then we knew we were like, who do we hone? We train first or lead first because they are already capable of seeing something that is not yet there and something beyond themselves. The second archetype that I saw is the rebel. And we have this everywhere in the community. The rebels are, people who are like, and this is for me personally struggle with the rebel because I'm very much of a soft, anti-conflict person. But it's also I'm learning to work with rebels because they just, they have a sense of pushing for something that they want to prove you otherwise, like because we need the rebels, like for example, this weekend we celebrated 123 years of independence. Without the rebels, we wouldn't have this
Yeah.
freedom. And the rebels
And they
show
have this
us,
energy of like they have this energy of like break the system. It's not
yeah, and they have
working,
so
break it.
much, they have so much courage that even if,
Mm,
you're not dealing with something that people accept right away, but they have so much courage to just like, I'm just gonna do it, even if so that's a creativity, when you think about art. Modern art was born out of rebellion of the way the traditional art, making was, realistic, all these things. The people who are trying to change the way we see art, the way we see which is a reflection of the world, is, like you have Picasso or all these things to try to rethink the way we see an expression of reality. The third one is what I observe is the curious. So someone who's always like, they're not ready so much. You're not the loud rebel type or visionary, like, whoa, look at me. But they're like, I'm always looking, studying, exploring, and just, I see a lot of these really amazing people who's just like, I'm just gonna test it in my roof garden. I'm just gonna test it here. And then in the field also we notice like there are farmers like, I'm just gonna look, observe, and then eventually siya pala yung magiging teacher. He would be teaching eventually
mm,
because he learned over time. But this is also a skill to cultivate, because when we're really closed and fixed about something, that's not really being creative because we're just, this should be the world. But if we come
mm,
from a lot of curiosity, which comes from also empathy, being able to relate, not, and even if you're not sure, this is really what you believe in, you're just really curious, without judgment. And so those are the three things that I saw as like creative skills. But of course, they have shadows too, and it's important to know that because we're also like, not everyone is perfect. The visionary is like, oh, great ideas, but can you operationalize it? Can you manage that? That's also my problem sometimes. Like, and I have also to ground myself, so that's also a skill. The second is the rebel. Of course, the rebels
mm,
sometimes because they're just so like against something and they forget also to be able to relate and engage, and sometimes it creates more enemies rather than creates more buy-in and support. The third one, the curious, of course, the curious takes a lot of time, and it's also like, when are you going to be ready because we need you now, or like, so it's also being able to kind of step into like, slowly bigger steps. um, and then in many levels, these also are part of working with the framework that I've been developing for 7 years about the journey from illusion to intuition to imagination. I think imagination is like it's really one of the skills of that we need to cultivate, especially when things are not clear, it's uncertain.
mm,
And it's something, it has a lot to do with being very clear about who you are, and that you're also able to kind of know what you're not. And it started actually with reading Gabrielle Roth's Maps to Ecstasy. Gabrielle Roth is a dance and movement artist, and I was reading her book, and she shares these stages of movements and ways of kind of experiencing change exactly in these levels. And there were our early other movements, inertia, which is like the beginning of the force, and then in working your illusion. Illusion is where you kind of when you thought something was true and it's no longer true. And so it's like,
Mhm.
oh, I used to, diba, illusion is like, para ano siya, parang magic, diba? You thought totoo siya, but it's, you know, a different kind of magic, lahat magic maybe, but it's like, you know, like the way the systems happen in the world now, it's collapsing because we used to think, you know, we used to think doing this was okay, and now apparently it's not. It's no longer helpful for our health, our environment. When we're working with people who have physical or emotional conditions, it's like what used to be true for me before that, you know, what did I believe in
Mhm.
before that when something happened to me, it's no longer true. I'm no longer this bad person I used to think I was because somebody taught me to think I was like this. So that's an recognition of illusion. The next stage is intuition, because in illusion we are already you think about what's no longer true. So if things are no longer true, where do you find truth? And so you try to go
Mhm.
back to yourself, your intuition. Like, so what is the truth that I used to forget, used to believe it's no longer true? Our intuition, our gut feeling, our, you know, this is the part of us that I have a feeling this is true. But then because, you know, the schools, the church, the system, you know, makes us think, no, no, you have to think this way. And it's the same with art making, to be honest, because a lot of art, you know, usually has to do with what we think of art as the high art, you know, like when people have to follow the fine arts. But it's also really about, you know, being able to create from what you feel and what you're thinking and who you are. Intuition is also a way to, in change making in the field, it's also intuition, because intuition is going inward. It's also about, like, for example, when we work in designing with communities, it's like, what do you already have? What are the inner resources and outer resources you already have in your community? And inner resources can be like your skills, your knowledge, your patience, even your values. Outer resources can be like, oh, we have seeds, we have, you know, leftover wood from somewhere, or we have land. That's a resource that exists. And when we really focus on intuition, or a way to kind of a source you draw from, and it's at the deeper part of the process, it it helps you kind of know that you actually have that capacity to recover. And so this is a journey of remembering ourselves and remembering our true selves. And the last part is, now we're very clear of who we are and our true selves. And then it's easier to create what we want, because once you know who you are, um, once you know what you want, and because you know no longer, you already know what you are not with the illusion, where it's no longer true to you, then it's easier for you to, like, okay, this is what I want, and I deserve that, or this is you have the resources for that, I have the inner resources to do that, and then I could create. Then imagination is easier because there's no, like, um, self doubt or negative, you know, belief system that makes you feel like you can't create what you want. So it's a journey. Later on, after the break, I will show you a map that I've been working on this journey, and I'm happy to kind of share the screen to do that later. So yeah, I'm really inspired to share this and continue with it.
Yes, that's a wonderful how do you call it? It's a wonderful description of an entire journey. Yeah, the three-step process. And I also love the three types of adapters you mentioned earlier. Um, and in all these, I am I feel like a lot of people can really benefit from, you know, self-reflecting where they might be, or which among the three former categories they might be in, because there's also a tendency to judge ourselves negatively if, like, what we are moved to do is not according to what's expected by society or with other people, but actually these are moments when we're coming from our intuition, and if others would call it their own truth, right? So, and that's very important to acknowledge, because as co-creators in the process, we really also need to recognize and acknowledge our own unique role and our truth in um, our role in the entire picture, in the bigger picture. So yeah, like Sarah mentioned, we'll be sharing more about the framework that she came up with later, and then it will be more interesting because she will be sharing about her initiatives. So you'll see concrete examples of how these steps in her framework really how these unfold and what these look like. So stay tuned, and we'll be back in a minute.
so that we can just help people stay calm and spread calm at this time. And if we can just really lighten the load of everybody, and lalo na with the social distancing that's being done, we kind of feel alone. Even now, we're still on lockdown. And I just want people to know that, guys, you're not alone. Kaya natin to. Together we can do this. That's why we have programs every Tuesday, every Thursday. There's a class or a workshop which is free to the community so everybody can come together.
Here are our programs on personal growth and healing for you.
All right, so we're back. And like I said earlier, Sarah has done a lot of transformative processes in various fields and weaving lessons and healing approaches in everything she does. So in 2012, her work with mandala in arts relief, rituals, and community building was even awarded by the Arts and Healing Network. So that kind of recognition just shows how impactful these initiatives have been. So, Sarah, please do the honors of walking us through this entire process you have designed based on your ground
Ah,
experience.
thank you. I've forgotten about that award. It's really nice to remember. It's like, wow, that's like almost 8 years or 9 years now. So, um, yeah, I never really saw myself as like I'm only an artist or I'm only like a change maker or development worker. For one, I wanted to really be an artist, but of course, we grew up and you're more encouraged to take a path that's like more that would have a profession or work, at least from the standards of the generations before us. So it's like, okay, how can I be helping others but also be creative at the same time? And I used to think it had to do with art making purely, and that I could work for museum, which was great, and I also taught community art, which was great, and to teach to share the skills of creativity and actually the stages of the illusion, intuition, imagination. I've been working with that before. I read the book of Gabriel Roth, and it was like exactly kind of the tools that we needed by using art as a lens, but really how does it reflect in life? And so for me, like one experience of creativity is how do I imagine this? This is like if I could tell you a pitch an experience. So it's an example of how art making can be part of a life life shifting, life reflective process also, and then a community level process. So I'll speak of those layers. So when I worked in peace building for many years, and work with interfaith leaders, intercultural leaders, and work in the peace process, consultation of the government and the more Islamic liberation front. And of course, working with that is more of like the consultation part. But on the side, a big part of me is like, how do we use, ways of remembering and deeper knowing and ritual through ritual and remembering the sacred in the work and purpose of why we do what we do. And so in many of these experiences, I've been like kind of drawn to kind of suggest like so for the peace talks, the resumption of the peace talks, like how can we create this as a ceremony, like even because we know that it's been decades of war and bloodshed, how can we create this ceremony as a way to like really market that, including something from the future in the space so that it's not yet it also involves like the next generation and eventually I after that years later I felt inspired to create to co-create because I always recognize that we're not just alone in the creation process. We're always drawing from inspiration, we're drawing from experience, we're drawing from elders, people, mentors we've studied from, and it's one experience was that when the um, peace process was about to, was coming to a close, the peace agreement was going to be signed. I felt inspired to kind of create a space in one of the, it was just like a deeper calling, like I'm supposed to do this. And then on the same day, when I thought about that, the same day, actually, the peace agreement signing was announced. I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And then so, and then for some reason, I was not in Manila. I eventually got led to be in Manila. And then um, working with chaos and uncertainty was kind of becoming my life experience. So one story that started there was when I was so I'm gonna share my screen. When we started, bear with me, I will structure it this one later. Honestly, don't know how to kind of structure this properly because it's a little bit of so when we arrived in Mendiola, there was this, there was the Muslims were praying because it's going to be an activity where people gather to support the signing of the peace agreement. So that space was, made sacred by this the prayers done, and then eventually people started going back in the middle, and it became a bit chaotic with a lot of people. And so for us to create something, we built a circle and then created, used chalk art to represent the different weaves from the different ethnic groups and tribes, Islamic tribes of Mindanao, and create that circle to create space of clarity about, to create sacred space together. And in that process, we also, we at first it was chaotic. People would step on the drawings, and then once you start building each pattern, and people started collaborating, and then I don't know if you've been to Mendiola, just like a really
Yes.
public space. So, and then you have like lots of people rallying with their megaphones and their mics. So, how do you create a
Mhm.
sacred space there? So, with young people, the Muslim Christian leaders of Tala in Caloocan, which is a partner of the Peacemaker Circle, where I used to work before. They helped us create this, and then they really created that space slowly. And once people started seeing the beauty of this process, like wow, this is amazing, so people started helping, and then as we built on the evening that space, which at earlier that day was never clear to me that it's going to be an intertribal peace pact led by Dr. Vic Sawai. And for me, it was just really trusting the process. Like, oh wow, I didn't realize this space was being created for that. And just like, and then so that evening, so when the peace agreement was signed in Malacanang, the presidential palace, the panel, the peace panel, the More Islamic Liberation Front, and the Philippine government panel, they went to the Mendiola to do this the ritual intertribal pact, peace pact, led by Dato Vic and other tribal representatives, because they of course believe that this is not just a peace agreement that's just signed in paper, but this is an agreement across like decades of intergenerational trauma and the descendants and ancestors involved and the nature spirits involved, of course, in the process of making this sacred, this pact of peace. And for us, having created that space, it's very, I'm going to stop share there quickly. It was amazing because the whole creation process was coming from, I have no idea what I'm going to do. Like, I just know I'm supposed to do it. And then, of course, I had to go through some chaos myself. Like, oh my God, I, I had internal process, a lot of illusion work, also self-doubt. I'm like, am I going to get to Manila? What am I going to do again? And then so much of this chaos. And in the same chaos also with like, the crowd wasn't a chaos because they were there for the peace pact, but also some people were against it and all these things. So it was technically chaos. But when we created space for something meaningful and beautiful and important, we slowly built that. At first, people don't believe it and don't, they're like, what is this? They stepped on it and all these things. So it's the same also when we're creating something in our lives. We're trying to make right about, our past and what we want to do. It's also a process of, trusting that process you slowly created. And you really have to create space. And this is very interesting because your topic is creating space. Creating space is really just, and the metaphor of working with a circle, and because mandalas, in Sanskrit, which means sacred circle, has been a part of my life too. I used it for my own healing myself after many years of, challenges. That way to reclaim my wholeness, and circles are a way to reclaim our wholeness as a symbol of wholeness. It also gathers people in an equal space without, who's above, below. And it also is a way to kind of, it's a safe space. Like here, I can be safe. Here, this is me. This is my own. These are my resources. These are my, this is what I want to create for myself. So it's very clear that you separate it from the chaos. So that's also working with intuition, symbolically working with that intuition work. But it's also really bringing people together to the idea that we are creating something different here that is separate from what used to be, that we are trying to leave from. The same with us, like when we do community gardens and evacuation centers or resettlements, it's also you create that space. Here, okay, sure, there's chaos out there. You don't know if you can go home but if we did this garden, we can still have food. We can manage our waste. We can also, even have livelihood. If that is a potential, then we can be self-sufficient. This is our space. This is our own food. This is our own energy. Um, so that became like a metaphor of many of my work over the years. And then when we reached the point where at some point, we didn't know what actually was unfolding before us. We're creating something that is not yet there, technically, that is not yet, we don't know what it is for. And then eventually it became like, oh, it's actually for a very bigger, something higher and bigger than ourselves. It's for this peace pact. And so that, that capacity to imagine and create, that is, if you don't know, that something has to be done, but you want to do it. It's not yet very clear, but you just trust the process, and you come from a clear knowing of, this is what I want to create. Of course, it was very clear as well for me to create the ethnic weaves there, but how it would look like in reality was not very clear to me. But I just trusted one pattern at a time, and so that also allowed us to trust that something else would come. When you let go of the idea, you have a control of what you should do. It's also a different level of manifesting. So imagination is not enough, actually. Imagination is like, great, I'm able to create what I want. But the next level is actually inspiration, where you no longer like, it's because you've already tapped into your highest, potential to create. So you've you've manifested. Inspiration is really when you let go of that idea that you are in control of this creation. So this is actually where the realm of, like, I guess the shamans and the people who are ready to let go of their possessions and their lives. It's like, oh, if I lose that, I can easily create that. Or if I lose that, that wasn't really, important to me. There are other ways and experiences. So inspiration is really where you really interact with divine, the higher, higher, dreaming and your guidance, and just, allows to flow through you. Of course, that's a different conversation, but creativity on those levels, is a journey from yeah, the illusion to imagination to inspiration. So I'm gonna share the so this one I developed. I don't know if really to say develop because honestly I don't really like claiming stuff or I don't even know how to name this framework. But I started this actually when I was invited by a wellness center and a healing center to develop materials for their cancer patients. So because I work with expressive arts, back then I was studying expressive arts therapy and working with healing work. And also back then my mom was sick and she was diagnosed with cancer. And so for me there were so many of these inquiries about, what is healing, what is recovering. And this was 7 years ago. And yeah, I was reading Gabrielle Roth's book and I was like, oh, this is exactly what I do when I teach art in communities. And so these are the creative lenses we were talking about, illusion. And the same with, when things are shaking in the world now, we are starting to see the illusion break down. Normally, people, when things fall apart, we want to draw a straight line. We actually want to follow, we don't want this dive. We don't want to go deep into the pain. And but if you really want to transform, truly transform, this is where we go deep into our belief system, our mental models. So this is really a dive into our intuition. What is really true for us? What do we really truly believe? And then this is the stage where we claim, become survivors. So when we work also in the psychology of loss and damages, is that it does take a journey for people to feel their victimhood. When you're in the illusion stage, you're really coming from the victimhood of something that you were thought to believe in is no longer true, and it's something more external from you that it was taken away from you, your house, your money, or your livelihood, or even people who lose family members. And then, but you go journey to survivor. It's a process of healing and finding your own resilience. Resilience is being able to come back to what you the your way of recovering. You have that. All of us have that, and we thought we lost that actually when something happens to us. But working with our intuition helps us remember that. This is really a process of restoring. So restoring is, pagbabalik. It's to really bring us together back. It's also like the mandala. It's really bringing everything in like an embrace or in together. But now that we know, when we reach the stage of, we've now survived, we've managed our emotions, our health, or we've managed a little bit of, a sense of having a little breakthrough of, what we've experienced. Then it's also now, how do we change the story? Because you can't go back, right? You don't want to go back here. And so the story is really a process of, being able to move from healing into wholeness. Wholeness is really coming from, it's not saying you're perfect, but it's saying that you have a sense of the parts of yourself that are there. You're like patching them together and weaving them together. And they can be many parts that are, small parts, big parts, and they are in harmony together. And you're now moving into becoming a thriver. So this is where you also go into imagination. You're now able to create, you can design the lifestyle, the community that you want. Thriver is to like, it doesn't mean nothing will happen to you, but if something happens to you, you can easily get back. You're not surviving lang. Merely surviving is really just, you get through the day or you get through that experience. But thriving is like, okay, I can think ahead. I have the system within me. I have the food system with me. I have enough resources with me that if anything happens, I have a buffer. I can get back on my feet. The same way with emotions. Okay, for example, being a thriver is like you have triggers in the past or anything, but you're able to like, okay, I know that I've been there. I know how to manage this. It can still happen. Grief work or triggers can happen, but you're able to kind of, be self-aware enough to manage that and how can I move past this? How can I create a better life for myself? So it's really that's a journey of, and of course this is not a one-way journey. Sometimes we go back and swing to this. And for me, this is the anchor. If you go back to your self-doubt and illusion, you go back to like, oh, it's so easy for me to just consume this way. And then you start like going back, okay, what do I really have and what do I really want? Who am I really? And then you draw from that, and then what do we want to pivot and transform to a a more thriving way of being. So, and for us, like in many of our work, it's often just about resilience. We just go back to being like, oh, resilient lifestyles, resilient communities. But it's really resilience is not enough. From our perspective, when we work with the regenerative movement, it's like, how do we think ahead? How do we be more preventive? How do we create not just for this place, but the whole place? Or not just for one aspect of change, but all of the aspects of change. Like it's not just about food, but livelihood, but energy, economy, and environment. So we have to think in a wider systems approach. So this journey for me is still ongoing, but I'm starting to share it just this year because I needed to like 7 years to incubate and live it. Although I've shared snippets of it in some wellness centers and some conferences, but just a focused audience. But now I guess this is part of me sharing it to a wider audience. Um, yeah, so just that's in a nutshell. But a lot of had to journey with that on my own was really truly transforming for myself, and I'm happy to share that. I'm really grateful to be able to continue sharing that to others if it helps really and make it more applicable and yeah, and what's happening in the world.
Wow. Thank you so much. That's really impressive because it's not just like a mental model that's based on concepts, but it's really lived reality. It's like you really walk the territory, not just, it's not just getting getting concepts from various frameworks and then integrating it, but it's really something you've experienced in various levels. So
Yeah, yeah. Over time, I read some materials. It's like, oh, this is theory U, or is this is the Two Loops framework of the Berkman Institute, or this is I forgot other frameworks, but it's just living and observing and seeing the patterns in our lives and making it more applicable. So yeah,
mhm.
thanks for the affirmation.
Yeah. And while you were sharing about the ritual, the mandala you did during the cab signing, I just
Right,
remembered that I was there. I remembered that I was there.
you were
So,
there.
and yeah, and then days leading to that, we also had our own experience of creativity. Like I forgot which organization it was. Somebody from Cotabato announced that they wanted to do a caravan from Mindanao to Manila in support of the signing, and we were one of the organizations who joined, and we didn't know, it was just out of inspiration, and you don't know what's gonna happen. And it was so beautiful because every step of the way, or every city we passed through, another organization would join. Like imagine that's 3 days by land, land trip. So and then
Remember
we
that.
were welcomed in various cities by other peace builders who were also cheering on the signing. So it's very beautiful, and that was the culmination.
I
So
didn't even know that. That's really, yeah.
I lost my earpiece.
Oh no.
So that's wow, what a wonderful memory. So thank you so much for sharing that, because it also reminded me of that I was there. I forgot about that.
Amazing.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I really love that experience of really just surrendering, right, to the process, right? And it's like you're just letting yourself be an instrument for whatever emerges, and really trusting the process and co-creating with other people. Ah. So you mentioned earlier also about creativity on that level of um the spiritual realm, the way the indigenous elders would experience it. So, uh, while a large part of your practices are from your own life experience, you mentioned that you also draw from inspiration from indigenous and elders and spiritual ecology traditions shared by wisdom and culture bearers you've worked with. So, could you share some of the most significant principles and practices, or maybe just one, because we're a bit short on time, um, principles and practices you've learned, which you have also integrated in your own practice?
Yeah, wow. It's really hard to kind of name one because I started meditating when I was 16, and but of course, my spiritual path started as a child. My grandmother would bring me to church almost every day, and so I guess I went through so many waves and stages studying Christianity and Hinduism, meditation practice, yoga, Buddhism, Taoism, um, Sufi Islam, and then eventually like learned about energy work and then shamanism, and then I realized, all these paths led to the inner, in the divinity in us and outside of us. It's really being able to kind of find that relationship within, the God within us and the God outside. Um, and a lot of it have to do with just remembering. It's not about something you learn, that these traditions and practices are meant to remind us. One teacher, that has really been inspiring for me is he's. I asked him one time, like, why do we have to repeat rituals? Because so, in the church, you have to repeat the rosary, you have to repeat meditation, you repeat mantras, and it's like a repetition, and then it's like, and then he said, like, actually the gods or the higher beings, they don't really need it because they're already like, outside is the realm. They don't, in a way, they're not perfect, but it's just like they're already past this, need to be revered or respected, or it's actually for us, that sense of creating the sacred, of remembering. The rituals are there to kind of separate us from our normal thinking. It's decentering us as in expressive arts practice. It takes us away from our usual thinking. And so it's even like creating that sacred space is part of that, right? So we have that chaos in Mendiola. When you created a sacred space, like, oh wow, this actually space is like, now this is a space where a ritual is going to take place, and something that is beyond this what we see in the world now, and something that brings in the ancestors down and have the peace back with the um, different panels, I guess, different tribes. But the idea is that these practices are to help us remember our divinity. And so the idea for me to perfect those things disappeared already because of that. Of course, some traditions still keep that you have to follow certain steps, and that's okay because it helps, of course, because you're aligned with the moon, you're aligned with the cycles. But the most important thing is your intention. And for me, it really goes back to what is your intention. And so usually I learned from the shamanic tradition, you pray, you do rituals and offering of food at night. But then sometimes at night I'm really tired, and I get really sleepy, and so it's like I can do it in the morning, but at the same time, it's just where is my intention? If I do it at night and I'm so tired, I'm forcing it. Right? Um, so what I also learned from the traditions is that there is no death. Death is, and this is difficult to share because I'm still afraid of death, to be honest. But it's just the death that we know is like it's a fear-based understanding of maybe the word is not, the sentence is not there's no death, but death is and not what we think it is. It's like about, it's really allowing us to, the disasters that happen in life, it helps us shake our illusion about what is true, helps us go deep into what is really meaningful, and helps us rebirth, find that rebirth. Um, and that death or the chaos, the challenges, they are part of our healing, and they are part of us to mirror to ourselves what do we really need to work on. And coming from that frame, of course, like, it's really hard to do that. I can't curse here, but it's just like it's so, when you're faced with a challenge of that dying experience, dying of the self and your ego, and dying of what the we used to think should be, it's really hard. But then what I'm saying is that, but if you use that, the chaos, the conflict, as a way to kind of go beyond yourself, then you are rebirthing a new way of thinking and being. And so I guess that's a practice. I can't really talk about rituals, or it's more of like applicable in how you apply in life. But of course, I do my own, like really deep reverence to nature. I think that has been a lot a really rich tradition from I learned from the shamans and the tabaylans, is that they see beyond, what we just see now. We're very stuck in our physical world, but actually there are forces outside of us. There's someone taking care of our forest. There's someone taking care of our river. There's someone, and that reciprocity, being able to kind of give back and honor that is it's not actually for them. Well, yes, it is for them. We feed the spirits and all these things, but it's like what made other teacher was sharing. It's really for us to find that deeper connection of our higher selves and our what is sacred. And so that is the practice, I guess, that I would go back to. Um, so yeah, hopefully that's helpful to answer the question.
Wow, so beautiful. Um, I love how you emphasized and highlighted that chaos and disruption is actually an opportunity for us to re-examine illusions or shatter our illusions and rebirth or co-create something better out of that. And I'm still trying to digest most of what we've discussed. So probably now's not the time to synthesize that, and it's okay. But um, to wrap up this session, could you lead us in a short reflection or um, a prayer or meditation um, that's related with everything to like bring it to a close, like coming full circle.
Right. So yeah, let's kind of invite the idea of the circle, um, which represents our whole lives. We start, we were born, and we have an end, but it's actually not an end. We're trying to evolve further wherever our destination is. But imagine a circle as our way to find our wholeness, our um, sense of self, our sense of belonging, identity, and sense of divinity. So if you can close your eyes if you want. You can keep it open if you want. Just imagining that circle just around you, whether it's 2D circle or 3D. It's a ball of light, a shape that surrounds you. You are in the middle of it, and you being in the middle of it is a way of orienting yourself that you belong to all parts of. Um, you belong to a whole, a wider whole. Um, and that they also belong to you, and that you are part of everything. And in that circle, imagine all the parts of yourself that you thought you lost, and the parts of yourself that you would like to keep, the parts of yourself you would like to um, rekindle or remember. So whether it is about the values, the good things about yourself, it can be memories, it can be an object or an possession or anything that belongs to you that you feel can make you feel whole. So bringing that in the picture, or at least your imagination, imagining those parts of yourself integrating with you in your body, as if you're weaving, stitching, making whole parts of you that you thought you lost. And then embracing ourselves, you can embrace yourself literally or just imagining that integration of yourself, bringing that circle to our hearts. If it was a ball of light, it was a drawing of a circle, bringing that in your body, into your heart. In one deep inhale, in one deep exhale, we come back to this space that we share together and just express our gratitude and honoring of each other. And I'm so grateful to have shared that, and it's something that you know we would do in a creative way in a mandala art making probably, like it's just something that it's a good meditation practice as well. Yeah, salamat ulit, Ai, for this invitation. Really
Thank you
grateful to
so
be
much,
part of this.
Sarah.
Thank
We
you,
honor and
and
acknowledge you and everything you shared tonight. That was such an enriching session. And
yeah,
for those who would like to know more about what Sarah does, you can go to her website, Soil Soul Story. I think it will be flashed on screen. So
so
soil,
shy.
ayan,
That's okay.
soilsoulstory.com. Or you may contact her via sarah.soilsoulstory@gmail.com. Okay, so
Really
any
mean
final
it.
words for tonight for our viewers who
Um,
are currently experiencing struggles in their own journey?
yeah, going back to that intuition, the true self, and really being clear about what is illusion, what is the old self talking, and being able to be clear, and then that's the first step actually. Then the rest of the path it's much clearer. Of course, I'm not an expert, so I'm just sharing that. Of course, it takes a first step, to do that. And then I'm really grateful to Karen as well for creating this community of healers and creatives finding ways to just to help remember our true selves and find ways to heal as we go through all these challenges as well as much needed. So thank you to you, Karen and Ivy, and the community who invited me today. I'm so grateful.
Awesome. And thank you so much to everyone who joined us and sent in their comments. I wasn't able to read them because I was so engrossed with the discussion, but thank you so much.
Not too
And
much.
so, yeah, Jenny, Dindi is here. I think Sundaro's here. And Shirley, the Shirley, manggagawa, pwedeng may kakayahan. So, salamat po sa pagsulong ng diwang mapayapa. So, congratulations din daw. So, thank you so
Salamat.
much, everyone. And this has been Creating Space. See you again next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.